Most people glide across the surface of life. They crave distraction, not depth. Comfort, not truth. But there exists a rare breed of minds, deep thinkers, who do not accept the world as it appears. They dissect it. They question every layer of meaning. They stare into the abyss until the abyss blinks first. But there is a price for this kind of mind. And it's not what most people think. To be a deep thinker is not merely to possess intelligence, it is to live with a burden of perception. The average mind moves linearly, engaging with the world as it presents itself. But the hyperconscious mind spirals inward, folding layers of awareness upon themselves, analyzing not just what is, but what could be, what was, what might have been, and what it all means. At the neurological level, this phenomenon correlates with increased activation in the default mode network, DMN, a complex circuit involving the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus. The DMN is responsible for introspective thought, self-referential processing, and mental time travel. It's the seat of rumination, daydreaming, moral reasoning, and existential evaluation. While this network is essential for creativity and imagination, it comes at a price: chronic cognitive noise. According to studies in Nature Reviews Neuroscience, the deep thinker's DMN is rarely quiet. Even in so-called resting states, their minds remain active, replaying conversations, reconstructing failures, simulating future confrontations, questioning intentions, dissecting language, reconstructing reality through abstract frameworks. For most people, silence is peace. For deep thinkers, silence is just a more intimate form of interrogation. They become meta-conscious, not only aware of their thoughts, but aware of their awareness. Every idea spawns counter-ideas. Every belief collapses under its own scrutiny. Certainty becomes fleeting. Ambiguity becomes a habitat. The deep thinker, unlike the average person, is cursed with the inability to accept simplicity at face value. Behind every smile, they sense an agenda. Behind every memory, a distortion. Behind every decision, a fractal of conflicting drives. What appears to others as detachment or social awkwardness is often an invisible war within, a wrestling match between intuition and analysis, instinct and intellect, heart and hypothesis. This hyper-reflective mode is what allows them to see what others miss, but it is also what renders them perpetually restless, spiritually fatigued, and existentially haunted. High intelligence is not synonymous with joy. In fact, for many, it is precisely the opposite, a neurological mismatch between complexity of mind and simplicity of reward. A 2018 study from the University of Rochester demonstrated that individuals with advanced verbal and abstract reasoning skills exhibited lower baseline dopamine receptor sensitivity. In simple terms, their brains are less responsive to the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation, pleasure, and reinforcement. While the average person might find a viral video, a shopping spree, or a night out gratifying, the deep thinker experiences these stimuli as neurochemical underwhelm. The smarter the mind, the harder it is to trick into feeling satisfied. This is not depression in the clinical sense. It is a form of existential anhedonia, a disinterest in shallow stimulation because the psyche craves intellectual, moral, and philosophical weight. Conversations about gossip feel unbearable. Meaningless rituals drain energy. Performative social norms, parties, posturing, networking, are seen not as fun, but as hollow pageantry. And so the intelligent become psychologically misaligned with their environment. Culture built on attention economy and dopamine addiction rewards superficiality. But the deep thinker searches for meaning, contradiction, transcendence, things that rarely arrive through casual experience. The result is a quiet alienation, a feeling of being mentally exiled from one's generation, a craving for depth that the world treats as inconvenient or too much. This dopamine disparity creates a psychological paradox. They are mentally rich but emotionally starving. They possess high pattern recognition but cannot relate to others' patterns of joy. They see too much and yet feel too little from what most consider pleasurable. And worse, they often blame themselves for this. They internalize their disconnection as failure, when in reality, it's the world that is too shallow for the depth they bring. To be a deep thinker is not simply to process more, it is to absorb more. It is to see through social masks with X-ray precision. It is to feel what is unspoken, to detect micro-emotions buried beneath words, to intuit the emotional undercurrents others are too distracted to notice. This hypersensitivity is often labeled as empathy, but in truth it is closer to a form of neural vulnerability. A kind of cognitive emotional permeability where the thinker doesn't just understand others, they internalize them. Imagine walking through the world without psychological skin. Every raised eyebrow feels like a verdict. Every silence like a loaded gun. Every fake laugh like an alarm bell ringing from someone else's unconscious. This is the curse of hyper-empathy, a phenomenon well documented in psychological literature, particularly in trauma-informed neuroscience. Deep thinkers, especially those with childhood environments marked by unpredictability or emotional neglect, often develop this trait as a survival mechanism. By becoming attuned to nuance, to tone, to unspoken tension, they could anticipate danger, a slammed door, a shift in voice, the sudden freeze of a parent's face. But what begins as a strategy becomes a prison. Now, as adults, these thinkers walk into rooms and feel the repressed anger of a stranger. They sit at dinner and sense the marital resentment beneath polite conversation. They hear the loneliness behind jokes. They witness the lies others tell themselves and carry the weight of those lies as if they were their own. This isn't spiritual. It's exhausting. Observation, when it cannot be filtered, becomes a form of psychic trauma. Because you see but cannot speak. You feel but cannot express. To name what others deny is to invite their discomfort, even hostility. The deep thinker becomes a threat to social equilibrium simply by existing. Their insight is often dismissed as cynicism, paranoia, or overthinking. But it's not overthinking. It's accurate perception that others are not prepared to confront. And so they carry it alone. The deeper you see, the further you drift. There is a sacred violence in seeing too clearly. Insight at a certain level becomes incompatible with the social contract. The deep thinker becomes a mirror, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that reveals. And in a world addicted to comfort, that kind of reflection is unwelcome. Most people don't want to grow. They want to be affirmed. Most don't want truth. They want anesthetic. And the truth teller becomes a social liability. This is not new. From Socrates, forced to drink hemlock, to Giordano Bruno burned alive, to Nietzsche dying in madness, the pattern is ancient. Those who see beneath the surface are punished for disturbing it. Not because their insight is incorrect, but because it makes others uncomfortable. And so begins the existential isolation of the deep thinker. They speak and are misunderstood. They remain silent and are unseen. They love and are called intense. They pull away and are labeled distant. Carl Jung named this the individuation process, the painful path of confronting and integrating the unconscious into consciousness. But this journey is not abstract poetry. It is ego death. It is the disintegration of inherited identities, the annihilation of illusion, the confrontation with one's own inner contradictions, projections, ancestral trauma, and moral shadows. To walk this path is to lose belonging in every tribe that requires conformity. It means no longer participating in the rituals of superficiality. It means stepping away from collective narratives and standing in the storm of your own unfiltered truth, without applause, without rescue, without reassurance. Because the deeper truth always costs belonging. And wisdom, if pursued honestly, often leads to exile. Not physical exile, but existential, a quiet, invisible rift between your mind and the world it observes. The deep thinker becomes fluent in a language most people have never heard, and now they speak with no one to listen. The deep thinker does not merely live through time, they interrogate it. According to neuroscientist David Eagleman, our perception of time is not fixed but elastic. It stretches or contracts depending on how much sensory and cognitive data the brain processes in a given moment. This is why novel experiences like travel, trauma, or moments of danger feel subjectively longer. The brain is absorbing and encoding more data. Now imagine the hyperactive cognitive architecture of a deep thinker, constantly analyzing, cross-referencing, associating, abstracting. Their brain does not skim reality, it penetrates it. Each passing moment becomes a mosaic of meanings, implications, doubts, and echoes. The present is never just now, it is past, future, and meta-perspective, all converging at once. Time for them is not linear. It is recursive, multi-layered, heavy. This high-resolution cognitive processing makes the clock feel slower, not because time has changed, but because their mind experiences more within it. As a result, deep thinkers often feel like temporal outsiders. They experience the emotional weight of a decade in a single year. They carry memories not just as stories, but as symbolic frameworks. They compare moments not to trends, but to archetypes. This can create a peculiar sense of existential aging. They feel old, not in body, but in awareness. While their peers celebrate superficial milestones, the deep thinker is quietly unraveling the philosophical paradoxes of selfhood, mortality, and meaning. Fun becomes elusive. Joy is often fleeting. Because where others feel alive in the moment, the deep thinker is often watching themselves feel, observing, dissecting, questioning. This detachment doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from overconsciousness, from having lived so much internally that reality feels like a repetition of what's already been simulated. In this way, deep thinkers don't age by years. They age by layers of perception. And for them, youth is not a time. It is a mask they learn to wear while carrying the weight of unseen decades in their minds. There is a brutal irony in the psychology of manipulation. The more emotionally evolved a person is, the more exploitable they can become. In the field of dark psychology, manipulators are not drawn to the shallow. Shallow people are reactive, rigid, predictable, poor material for psychological control. Predators seek complexity. They look for thinkers, feelers, introspective souls with rich inner lives, because these are the people most likely to question themselves before others. And that is the key. Deep thinkers are trained by their own intelligence to doubt, to reflect, to assume nuance in everything, including abuse. Their empathy makes them excellent emotional readers, but it also makes them prime emotional targets. The manipulator sees this and strategizes accordingly. Insight? Twist it. You're reading too much into it. Sensitivity? Exploit it. Why are you so dramatic? Accountability. Weaponize it. You're the one who always needs fixing. Self-doubt? Amplify it. You're confused again, aren't you? This psychological warfare is subtle. It happens through micro-invalidations, gaslighting, emotional projection, and trauma bonding. And the more intelligent the victim, the more sophisticated the manipulation must be. Because the deeper the psyche, the deeper the hook must go. It is a tragic paradox. The very traits that make deep thinkers valuable, insight, empathy, self-awareness, are the traits that make them ideal prey to narcissists and psychological predators. Unless they learn to weaponize their perception. This means learning to recognize patterns, not just individual moments. Trust instinct, not just logic. Understand manipulation tactics the same way they understand emotional nuance. Set boundaries not based on guilt, but on discernment. The goal is not to become cold or paranoid. It is to become aware of one's psychological aura, to understand that depth attracts attention, and attention attracts both admiration and exploitation. Power begins when perception becomes defense, not just empathy. And when intelligence is no longer just a lens, but a shield. Deep thinkers often carry an invisible weight, not only because they understand more, but because they are expected to understand for others. The world, whether consciously or unconsciously, places them in the role of the interpreter, the peacemaker, the emotional translator. They're the ones who should know better, who should be more patient, who are too smart to let that get to them. This unspoken burden stems from a profound misunderstanding that intelligence and insight somehow cancel out emotion. But in truth, the deep thinker feels more, not less. They just process it through a more intricate maze of internal logic and emotional calculus. And that complexity leads to a kind of moral fatigue. They are often the first to forgive because they see the childhood trauma behind the cruelty. They are the last to judge because they perceive the unresolved grief beneath the mistake. They are the ones who absorb blame, not because they are wrong, but because they can handle it. But here's the truth. Understanding is not the same as healing. And empathy without boundaries becomes self-erasure. Being the one who always understands slowly becomes a form of martyrdom. Every compromise chips away at authenticity. Every rationalization distances them from their own pain. Over time, the deep thinker becomes morally exhausted, not from cruelty, but from constantly being the one who is both sides. And yet, they often suffer in silence. Why? Because to admit exhaustion feels like weakness. Because no one asks how they feel, everyone assumes they already know. But even the wise need refuge. Even the insightful need care. Even the strong need to be held without being dissected. For the deep thinker, the greatest battles are not external. They are internal wars between two voices that rarely agree. The analyst, who wants clarity, control, structure. The soul, who longs for chaos, connection, and surrender. This is the paradox of deep intelligence. The mind can construct cathedrals of logic while the heart bleeds quietly in the corner. It can solve problems for others while being unsolvable to itself. Every decision becomes a conflict between analysis and emotion. I know I shouldn't care, but I do. I understand why they hurt me, but I still feel betrayed. I can explain the trauma, but I can't stop reliving it. This isn't indecision. It's bifurcation, a mind split between the desire to master experience and the need to feel it fully. And in this split, deep thinkers often lose themselves. They intellectualize grief. They rationalize red flags. They suppress intuition in favor of reason, only to later drown in the feelings they postponed. The danger isn't that they feel too much. It's that they try to explain what must be felt. Carl Jung warned that when the intellect dominates, the soul retreats into shadow. The result? Emotional numbness. Disconnection from the body. A life lived in brilliant analysis but absent embodiment. Healing for the deep thinker doesn't come through more thinking. It comes through integration, allowing reason and feeling to coexist without one invalidating the other. It means allowing the tears without explanation, the rage without justification, the love without fear of appearing foolish. Only when the internal dialectic is honored can the deep thinker stop fighting themselves and finally come home. Intelligence is power, but without self-love, it becomes a precision weapon turned inward. The deep thinker is a master of insight. They can deconstruct ideologies, identify toxic patterns, diagnose behaviors, and articulate the subtlest nuances of emotional dynamics. But this brilliance becomes dangerous when it's turned on the self without mercy, without compassion, without pause. A mind without love becomes a courtroom. And the deep thinker is both judge and prisoner, because they see themselves too clearly. They remember every mistake. They analyze every word they said. They compare their lives not to others, but to impossibly high inner ideals. This is the tyranny of internal standards, perfectionism not in aesthetics, but in morality, depth, consistency, meaning. They don't just want to be right. They want to be pure. They don't just want to succeed. They want to deserve it. And when they fall short, which every human does, they punish themselves with surgical accuracy. Worse, they believe their suffering is earned. That they deserve loneliness because of some subtle failure of character. That they're unlovable because of their depth, their intensity, their darkness. They can name every flaw with poetic precision, but cannot name one quality they love about themselves without cringing. Why? Because they were trained to love ideas, not selves. They were taught to master complexity, not to rest in kindness. They were conditioned to achieve, not to receive. Intelligence without self-love is a curse, because it sharpens self-awareness, but numbs self-acceptance. The answer isn't to think better. It's to feel softer. To learn to sit with one's brokenness without trying to fix it. To speak to the inner child not in the language of critique, but of compassion. To see the self not as a problem to solve, but as a mystery to hold gently. Because the most intelligent person in the world, without love, becomes the architect of their own suffering. There's a unique kind of loneliness that no one talks about. It doesn't come from lack of contact. It comes from lack of cognitive resonance. From speaking a language few understand. From living in a mental landscape so vast, so layered, so intricate, that most conversations feel like trying to describe a symphony through a straw. This is the loneliness of the unmirrored mind. Most deep thinkers don't want praise. They don't crave followers or applause. What they long for is simple, yet incredibly rare: to be seen fully and without distortion. To be met with silence that listens, not silence that waits to reply. To speak the truth of their experience without being called too much, too intense, too serious. To reveal the architecture of their inner world and not be met with glazed eyes or nervous laughter. But the world does not mirror them. It reflects superficiality, algorithmic thought, small talk, echo chambers. People repeat slogans, not questions. They perform identities, not explore them. They live in reaction, not reflection. And so the deep thinker retreats. not out of superiority, but out of starvation. They are not nourished by what others call connection. They seek resonance, not validation. They seek sacred dialogue, not banter. They want someone to enter their inner cathedral, not to worship, but to walk its halls with reverence. And until that happens, they walk alone. Not because they're lost, but because the path they walk is rarely traveled. This solitude can be fertile, but it can also be crushing. Because we are social beings, and even the deepest mind needs a mirror, a witness, a soul that says, "I see you, I think like you, I feel what you mean." Until that mirror is found, the deep thinker remains in exile, not of body, but of spirit. And that's the paradox of deep thinkers. They see what others can't, but must pretend not to, just to survive. If you are one of them, don't dull yourself to fit in.